I buried my son on a Thursday. The sky was gray, the kind that doesn't move, just hangs there heavy. People kept coming up to me, hugging me, saying words I don't remember. I nodded, I thanked them. I stood there like a mother is supposed to stand. But something wasn't right. It wasn't the grief. I knew what grief felt like. This was something else. Because while I was standing there, watching them lower my son into the ground, I realized I wasn't the only one saying goodbye. I looked over at her, my daughter-in-law. She wasn't crying. Not once. No trembling hands, no broken voice, no eyes searching for comfort. Just stillness. Cold stillness. And when people came up to her, she didn't lean into them the way I did. She stood straight, composed, like she had already accepted something the rest of us didn't know yet. At first, I told myself, everyone grieves differently. I tried to believe that. But then there was a moment, a small one, so small anyone else would have missed it. The pastor was speaking. Everyone had their heads bowed, and I just happened to look up. She wasn't looking at the casket. She wasn't looking at the ground. She was looking at the house. Our house, the one my son grew up in, the one I helped him keep when things got hard. And there was something in her eyes, not sadness, not loss, something else. Something I couldn't name at the time, but it stayed with me. Even after they covered his casket, even after people started leaving, even after the silence came. Because standing there, with dirt still fresh on my son's grave, I felt it, a quiet shift, like something had already changed and I was the last one to realize it. I just didn't know yet how much it was going to cost me. When I got back to the house, it didn't feel like mine anymore. Nothing had moved, the same curtains, the same couch. My son's shoes are still by the door. But something was off. You know how a place can look the same but feel completely different? That's what it was. Quiet. Too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from grief. I know that kind. This was controlled, like a room where a conversation had just ended the moment you walked in. I stepped inside slowly, closing the door behind me. No one greeted me. No one said, "Are you okay?" No one even looked up. They were all in the living room. Her, sitting in my son's chair. That was the first thing I noticed. Not beside it, not near it, in it, like it had always been hers. I stood there for a second, waiting for her to say something, anything. But she didn't. She just glanced at me, then looked back down at the papers in her hand, papers I had never seen before. I took a few steps closer, slow, careful, like I was walking into a space I wasn't sure I belonged in anymore. "What are those?" I asked. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. She didn't answer right away, just flipped a page, calm, steady, like I wasn't even there. Then finally, without looking up, she said, "Just things that need to be handled." Things. That word stayed with me. Things. Not our things. Not his things. Just things. I looked around the room. My family was there, but they didn't feel like mine in that moment. No one met my eyes. No one spoke. It was like they had all agreed on something, and I hadn't been invited into the conversation. I sat down slowly, not in my usual seat. That one was taken. So I chose the edge of the couch instead. Careful, quiet, like a guest. Minutes passed. No one said anything, just the sound of paper turning and the clock ticking on the wall. Then I noticed something else. Small, but not small at all. There were folders on the table, organized, labeled, stacks, neat, prepared. This wasn't something that started today. This had been planned. Before the funeral, before the burial, before I even had time to understand what was happening. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not grief. Something sharper. I looked at her again, really looked this time, and I realized she wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't lost. She wasn't trying to figure things out. She already knew what came next. And for the first time since I buried my son, I felt it clearly. I wasn't part of that plan. I just didn't know yet how far outside of it I had already been pushed. That night, we all sat at the table. Same table we'd used for years. Birthdays, holidays, Sunday dinners. My son used to sit at the head. Always said it made him feel responsible. Now that seat was empty. And somehow, everything felt rearranged without anyone moving a chair. She sat closer to that spot than anyone else. Not in it, but near enough. Close enough to feel like a quiet claim. Dinner was already on the table when I walked in. No one called me. No one asked if I was ready. They had already started. I paused for a moment, just standing there, waiting. Maybe someone would say, "Come sit." No one did. So I pulled out a chair slowly and sat down. The conversation didn't stop, but it didn't include me either. They were talking about next steps. That's what I heard. Next steps. Like my son's life had already been reduced to a checklist. I tried to follow along, but it was like listening through a wall. Then I heard her voice, clear, steady. We need to be realistic about everything now. Realistic. That word again. I looked up. She still hadn't looked at me. She was speaking to everyone else, like I wasn't sitting right there. I finally said something. "What does that mean?" The table went quiet. Not loud quiet, the kind that settles in slowly, uncomfortable. She placed her fork down gently, wiped her hands with a napkin. Then she looked at me, not angry, not emotional, just controlled. "It means," she said, "we can't keep things the way they were." Things. Again, always things. I felt my chest tighten. "This is still my home," I said quietly. For the first time, her expression shifted. Not much, just enough. A small tilt of her head, almost like she was surprised I said it out loud. Then she gave a slight smile, not a warm one, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "We'll talk about that," she said. "We'll talk about that," like it was up for discussion, like it wasn't already known. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to step in, to say something, to remind her, to remind everyone. But no one did. Not a single word. Some looked down, some kept eating, some just sat there pretending not to notice. And in that moment, I understood something I didn't want to understand. This wasn't just her. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't confusion. This was an agreement. silent but solid. I pushed my plate slightly away. I wasn't hungry anymore, not for the food, and not for whatever this had become. And as I sat there, surrounded by people I thought were mine, I felt it, clearer than before. I wasn't being included. I was being eased out, slowly, quietly, like it would hurt less that way. But it didn't. It hurt more, because no one was saying it out loud, and somehow that made it feel final. It happened 3 days later, not in the middle of an argument, not during one of those quiet dinners, just in the middle of the day, like it had already been scheduled. I was in my room, folding my son's clothes. I don't even know why I was doing it. Maybe it made me feel close to him. Maybe I just needed something to hold. That's when I heard the knock. Soft. Too soft. I knew it was her before I opened the door. She didn't wait long. Just opened it halfway and stepped in like she had every right to. No hesitation, no pause. "I need to talk to you," she said. "We can't talk. Not a good time. Just, I need to talk to you." I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. Something in my chest already knew what was coming. She stayed standing, didn't come all the way in, didn't close the door, like she didn't plan to stay long. "I think it's best," she said, calm and steady, "if you make arrangements to leave." For a second, I thought I heard her wrong. Leave? I looked up at her. "This is my home," I said. My voice was quiet but firm. She didn't react, didn't soften, didn't hesitate. "It's not that simple anymore," she replied. Not that simple, like it ever was. I stood up, slowly. My hands felt cold. "What does that mean?" I asked. She finally met my eyes, and this time there was something there. Not anger, not sadness, just certainty. "It means," she said, "things have changed. Things, always things." I took a step toward her. "1 week," she added, just like that. "1 week to figure out where you're going. A week, after everything, after I buried my son, after I sat at that table, after that I stayed quiet. A week." I felt something rise in my chest, not just hurt, something deeper. "You're telling me to leave my own house?" I said. She didn't answer right away, just adjusted her sleeve, like we were discussing something ordinary. Then she said it, clear, simple. Yes. No explanation, no apology, just yes. The room went still. I waited. I don't know what I was waiting for. Maybe for someone else to step in, maybe for her to take it back, maybe for this to feel like a mistake. But nothing changed. She stepped back toward the door. "I'll give you space to pack," she said. Space, like that was kindness. Then she left, just like that. The door stayed open behind her. I stood there for a long time, not moving, not speaking, just standing in a room that suddenly didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. Then slowly, I reached for my suitcase, the same one I used years ago when I used to travel with my son. I placed it on the bed. I opened it and just stared at it because I realized something at that moment. She didn't ask me to leave. She didn't suggest it. She didn't even argue about it. She had already decided, and everyone else had already accepted it. So I packed, quietly, piece by piece. No one came in. No one checked on me. No one said a word. And when I finally walked out of that house with my suitcase in my hand, no one stopped me, not even her. That's when it hit me. I wasn't leaving. I had already been removed. I just didn't know it until that moment. The first night was the hardest, not because I didn't have a place to stay, but because it didn't feel like anywhere. The room was small, clean, quiet, too quiet. I placed my suitcase near the wall and sat on the edge of the bed. For a long time, I didn't move. I just sat there, listening, listening to nothing. No footsteps in the hallway, no familiar sounds, no voice calling my name. That's when it started to settle in. Not the grief, that had already been there. This was different. This was absence. It was the kind of silence that leaves you with questions you didn't even know you had. I reached into my bag and pulled out one of his shirts. I don't remember packing it, but there it was, still carrying his scent. Faint, but enough. I held it close and closed my eyes. For a moment, I was back in that house, back before everything changed, back when things made sense. But the feeling didn't last. Something kept pulling at me, something I couldn't ignore. I opened my eyes and stared at the wall, and that's when the thoughts started. Slow at first, then louder, clearer. She was too prepared. The papers, the folders, the way she spoke, that wasn't grief. That wasn't confusing. That was planning. And not recent planning either. This had been building long before the funeral, before the burial, maybe even before that. I stopped myself. I didn't want to go there. But the thought didn't leave. It stayed. Then something else came with it, a memory, small but sharp. A conversation I had with my son not long before he passed. We were sitting in the living room. He looked tired but serious, like he was trying to say something without saying too much. He said, "Mom, if anything ever feels off, don't ignore it." At the time, I didn't think much of it. I thought he was just being protective. But now, it felt different. Now, it felt like a warning. I sat up straighter, my hands tightening around the fabric in my lap. If anything ever feels off, everything felt off. Everything. I stood up slowly and walked to the window, looking out into the dark. For the first time since I left that house, I didn't feel helpless. I felt alert. Because if he saw something, if he knew something, then maybe this wasn't over. Maybe what happened to me wasn't the whole story. And maybe I wasn't meant to stay silent about it. The call came the next morning, early, too early for anything ordinary. I was already awake. I hadn't really slept, just laid there replaying everything over and over again. When my phone lit up on the table, I stared at it for a moment before picking it up. Unknown number. For a second, I almost let it ring out. I didn't have the energy for more confusion, but something in me said, "Answer it." So I did. "Hello?" My voice sounded quieter than I expected. There was a brief pause, then a man spoke, calm, professional. "Good morning. Am I speaking with Mrs.?" He said my full name clearly, carefully. "Yes," I replied, sitting up slowly. "This is Mr. Lawson," he continued. "I was your son's attorney." That word landed differently. Attorney. I hadn't heard anyone mention a lawyer. Not at the house, not at the table, not during any of those quiet conversations I wasn't part of. He needs you to attend a formal reading of his will. A will? I felt my chest rise slowly. That meant one thing. My son had made decisions before he died, important ones. "When is it?" I asked. "Tomorrow afternoon." Tomorrow, not next week, not later. Tomorrow, like time mattered, like waiting wasn't an option. "Is everyone going to be there?" I asked carefully. There was a slight pause. "Yes," he said. "All relevant parties have been notified." Relevant parties. I knew what that meant. She would be there. Prepared. Confidence. Just like she had been in that house. Just like she had been at that table. And for a brief moment, I felt that same weight again. That same feeling of being pushed aside. But then he said something else. Something small, but it changed everything. "There are specific instructions your son left behind," he added. Specific instructions. Not general, not optional, specific. "And it's important that you hear them directly," he said. Directly. Not through someone else, not filtered, not explained. He wanted me there personally. That wasn't an accident. "I'll be there," I said. My voice is steadier now, stronger than it had been since the funeral. "Good," he replied. "I'll see you tomorrow." The call ended. Just like that. No extra words, no explanation, just certainty. I lowered the phone slowly and stared at it in my hand. My mind was already moving, faster than before, connecting things, the folders, the silence, the way she acted like everything was already decided. But if everything was already decided, then why did he sound like it wasn't? Why did he need me there? I stood up. I walked toward the window again, the same window I stood at the night before. But this time, the feeling was different. The heaviness was still there. The grief was still there. But underneath it, something else had started to rise. Clarity. Because for the first time since I was told to leave, something didn't add up. And when things don't add up, there's usually something being hidden. I looked out into the daylight, quiet, still. But I knew, by this time tomorrow, something was going to come to the surface. Something she wasn't expecting. And for the first time, I wasn't the one being pushed out of the story. I was being pulled back into it. The office was quieter than I expected. Not empty, just controlled. The kind of quiet where every sound feels like it matters. I arrived early. I didn't want to walk in after anyone else. Didn't want eyes on me before I was ready. The receptionist greeted me softly and pointed me toward a closed door. "Conference room," she said. I nodded and walked down the hallway slowly. Each step felt heavier than it should have, not from fear, from knowing. Something was waiting on the other side of that door. I just didn't know which shape it would take. When I reached it, I paused. My hand rested on the handle for a moment. Then I opened it. They were already there. All of them. Seated. Quiet. Watching. The room wasn't large, but it felt tight, like the walls were holding everything in. She was sitting near the center of the table, dressed neatly, composed, just like before. Nothing about her had changed. Not her posture, not her expression, not the way she carried herself. If anything, she looked more certain, more settled, like this was just the final step in something she already believed was hers. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw it again. That same look from the funeral. Not grief, not loss, expectation. I didn't look away. I walked in fully and chose a seat across from her. not beside anyone, not at the end, across, where I could see everything clearly, where nothing could be hidden behind a turned shoulder or lowered head. No one spoke to me. A few glanced up, then back down. Others avoided eye contact completely. It was the same silence as the house. But this time, it didn't feel like an exclusion. It felt like tension, like everyone was waiting for something specific to happen. A few moments later, the door opened again. The lawyer walked in. Mr. Lawson, calm, focused, carrying a folder in his hand. He nodded politely to the room, then took his seat at the head of the table. No wasted movement, no unnecessary words. He placed the folder down in front of him and looked around the room once, carefully, taking in every face. Then his eyes landed on me, just for a second, but it was enough. There was recognition there, intent, like he knew exactly why I was sitting where I was. He opened the folder slowly. The sound of paper shifting filled the room. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the air felt still. "This is the formal reading of the will," he began, his voice steady, clear, professional. No emotion, but no distance either. Just the truth. "As written and signed by the deceased." He said my son's full name. Hearing it like that, in that room, it settled differently. More final, more official, but also more real. I glanced at her just briefly. She sat back slightly in her chair, hands folded neatly, relaxed, like she had already heard all of this before, like nothing here could surprise her. And that told me everything I needed to know. She believed this was hers, completely, fully, without question. I turned my attention back to the lawyer because something in me said whatever came next was not going to match what she expected. And for the first time since I walked into that room, I felt it clearly. The shift, not around me, not behind me, but right there at that table, waiting to be spoken out loud. The room didn't move. No shifting, no whispering, not even a cough, just the sound of paper and his voice, measured, steady, unavoidable. He began reading, formal language, careful wording, names, dates, clauses. At first, it felt distant, like something meant for records, not for people. But then it started to narrow. The general statements ended, and the specifics began. I felt it before I understood it, that quiet tension tightening. He turned a page, paused briefly, then continued. "To my wife." He said her name. I didn't look at her right away. I didn't need to. I could feel it, that small shift in posture, that quiet confidence is settling in. This was the part she had been waiting for, the part she believed confirmed everything. The room leaned into it. Even the silence felt closer. He continued reading, measured, clear, and for a moment, nothing seemed unusual. Standard distributions, expected language, enough to make anyone believe this was going exactly the way she thought it would. Then he stopped. Not for long, just enough to turn the page, but something about that pause felt different. He looked down again, and when he spoke next, his tone didn't change, but the weight of his words did. "There are additional instructions," he said. Additional. I heard it. I felt it. Across the table, she didn't move. Not yet, but I saw her fingers tighten slightly, just for a second. He continued, "These instructions are to be carried out exactly as written, without alteration." Without alteration. That phrase settled into the room like something heavy, unavoidable. I lifted my eyes, and this time I looked directly at her. She was still composed, still calm, but something had shifted, just slightly. The certainty wasn't as solid anymore. The lawyer adjusted the paper in front of him, then read, "In the event of my passing," his voice steady, "the primary residence," the room held its breath, "is to remain under the control of my mother." Silence. Not the kind that passes quickly, the kind that lands and stays. For a moment, no one reacted, like the words needed time to be understood, to settle, to become real. Then I saw it, her expression. It didn't break, not completely, but it stopped, like something inside her had paused and couldn't catch up. The confidence she walked in with was gone. Not replaced with anger, not replaced with emotion, just gone. He continued reading, details, conditions, clear, direct, unmistakable. But I didn't hear all of it, because the room had already changed. The air felt different, the silence felt louder, and every eye, slowly, began to move. Not toward her, toward me. I didn't move, I didn't speak. I just sat there, hands still, back straight, because for the first time since this all began, I wasn't the one being questioned, I wasn't the one being ignored, I wasn't the one being pushed out. The truth had entered the room, and it didn't need my help to be heard. Across the table, she lowered her gaze slightly, just for a second, and that was enough, because at that moment, everything she thought she controlled slipped, quietly, completely, and the silence that followed said more than anything anyone could have spoken. No one spoke right away. The lawyer closed the folder, calm, precise, like nothing unusual had just happened, but everything had. You could feel it in the room, that shift. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. The chairs moved slightly. People adjusted their posture. Eyes that had avoided me before were now looking directly at me. Not with warmth, not even with an apology, just awareness, like they were seeing me clearly for the first time. I didn't rush to stand. I didn't say anything. I just sat there for a moment longer, letting it settle. Because this wasn't about reacting. This was about understanding what had just changed. Across the table, she hadn't moved much, but she wasn't the same. Her shoulders weren't as relaxed. Her hands weren't as still. That certainty she carried into the room was gone, replaced by something quieter, something uncertain. She finally looked up. Our eyes met again, but this time it was different. There was no confidence there, no control, just a question she didn't have the answer to anymore. I stood up slowly, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. The room watched. No one tried to stop me. No one tried to explain anything, because there was nothing left to explain. It had already been said, clearly. I picked up my bag, turned toward the door, and for a moment, I paused. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. I looked back once more. Not at everyone, just at her. And I realized something in that moment. She didn't expect resistance. She didn't expect the truth. She didn't expect to be wrong, but she was. And not in a way that could be fixed quietly, not in a way that could be hidden. This time, it was written, signed, spoken out loud. I turned and walked out of the room. No one followed me. No one called my name. And that silence felt different now. It wasn't an exception. It wasn't a dismissal. It was distance, the kind that comes after something has been settled. When I stepped outside, the air felt lighter, not because everything was suddenly okay, not because the pain was gone, but because something had been returned to its place. Something that had been taken quietly was now restored just as clearly. I stood there for a moment, looking ahead, not back, because I understood something now. They tried to move me out of my own story. They tried to decide things without me. They tried to make it feel final before it actually was. But the truth has a way of waiting, of holding its place until the right moment. And when it shows up, it doesn't argue. It doesn't fight. It just stands there, clear and unshaken, just like I was now. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and took a step forward, not into what I lost, but into what was still mine. And this time, I didn't need anyone to say it out loud. I already knew. I didn't fight for anything that day. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice, because the truth had already done that for me. And sometimes, that's the only thing that really matters. But I keep thinking, how many people are sitting in silence right now, being pushed out of their own lives because they don't know the full story yet? How many people are being told to step aside when they were never supposed to? If you've ever been in a moment like that, where something didn't feel right, but you couldn't prove it, just know this. Silence doesn't mean the story is over. Sometimes it just means the truth hasn't been heard yet. And when it is, everything can change. If this story stayed with you, if you felt even a part of it, subscribe to Quiet Voice of Her Life, because there are more stories like this, and some of them might sound closer to home than you expect. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what would you have done the moment she told you to leave? I read every single one, and sometimes your story matters just as much as mine. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. I looked back once more. Not at everyone, just at her. And I realized something in that moment. She didn't expect resistance. She didn't expect the truth. She didn't expect to be wrong. But she was. And not in a way that could be fixed quietly, not in a way that could be hidden. This time, it was written, signed, spoken out loud. I turned and walked out of the room. No one followed me. No one called my name. And that silence felt different now. It wasn't an exception. It wasn't a dismissal. It was distance, the kind that comes after something has been settled. When I stepped outside, the air felt lighter, not because everything was suddenly okay, not because the pain was gone, but because something had been returned to its place. Something that had been taken quietly was now restored just as clearly. I stood there for a moment, looking ahead, not back, because I understood something now. They tried to move me out of my own story. They tried to decide things without me. They tried to make it feel final before it actually was. But the truth has a way of waiting, of holding its place until the right moment. And when it shows up, it doesn't argue. It doesn't fight. It just stands there, clear and unshaken, just like I was now. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and took a step forward, not into what I lost, but into what was still mine. And this time, I didn't need anyone to say it out loud. I already knew. I didn't fight for anything that day. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice, because the truth had already done that for me. And sometimes, that's the only thing that really matters. But I keep thinking, how many people are sitting in silence right now, being pushed out of their own lives because they don't know the full story yet? How many people are being told to step aside when they were never supposed to? If you've ever been in a moment like that, where something didn't feel right, but you couldn't prove it, just know this. Silence doesn't mean the story is over. Sometimes it just means the truth hasn't been heard yet. And when it is, everything can change. If this story stayed with you, if you felt even a part of it, subscribe to Quiet Voice of Her Life, because there are more stories like this, and some of them might sound closer to home than you expect. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what would you have done the moment she told you to leave? I read every single one, and sometimes your story matters just as much as mine.